Hi there, welcome to Broken Ear Productions' first quick, dirty, cheap how-to video. Today I'm going to show you how to upcycle an old t-shirt into a fabulous mini messenger bag in just about 5 minutes. So you'll need a few tools to complete this project. A nice flat cutting surface. I'm using a self-healing cutting mat here, but you could certainly use any table or other flat surface. You'll need some cutting tools, and if you prefer you can use scissors or a rotary tool and a ruler. And if you like, you can use pins. Of course, that's optional for this project because, again, it's a quick, dirty, cheap kind of project. And last but not least, you'll either need a needle and thread, even from one of these kits would work, or a sewing machine. When you're choosing a shirt to use for this project, width is really more important than length. Because of the way we're going to cut and fold the shirt, if the shirt is not wide enough, then you really won't have a deep enough bag. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is lay my shirt completely flat, and I want the bottom parts to pretty well meet up. Then I'm going to take my ruler and my rotary cutter. Now remember, you can use scissors if you prefer, and I'm just going to cut off the bottom hem, and that's the part that's folded over and sewn. We're going to actually turn this bottom hem into the strap for the bag since it's already reinforced and sewn. So I'm going to cut just above where the seam sits. And what I've got now is a loop that's going to become my strap. So all I have to do to make that the strap is just pick a spot and cut it open. And there's your strap. Now, some of you might be bothered by this rough edge. I kind of like the way that it looks rough. Of course, it's up to you if you want to fold it over and sew it again so that you don't have that kind of rough edge. So now that I have my strap cut, I'm going to cut the body of the bag. I'm going to take the remainder of the shirt and pull it up onto my mat and make sure that it's nice and flat. And then I'm going to cut about 13 inches up from the bottom, straight across. Okay, so what I've got now basically is a rectangle with double thickness, okay, and it is closed at the ends. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to sew up the sides, and that's the open, longer sides, okay, leaving a small gap. And I'm going to sew in from the edge about 5/8 of an inch, so that's a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now I'm going to take this to my machine and sew it, but again, you could do this with a hand stitch very easily. I marked on my machine about 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to stick my piece in at the open end, and I'm going to line it up with that piece of tape that I've set down there. Now this is painter's tape, so it'll come up really easily if you decide to use it for your sewing machine. I've also chosen a contrasting thread in a pink color so that you can kind of see the stitches as I do them. But you may choose to do a matching thread if you prefer. So I'm going to sink my needle, do a few stitches, and then back down. I'm going to sew all the way down about 5/8 of an inch. Now I'm actually going to stop about 7 inches above the very, very bottom of this piece because I'm going to leave a gap. So just a guesstimate, but this is about 7 inches from the bottom. And I'm actually going to go ahead and back tack now and pull the piece out. So I trimmed the threads and I pulled the piece out. And remember that I stopped the seam about 7 inches up from the bottom. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to feed the piece back into my machine, but I'm going to leave a big gap in the seam, not really big, maybe about 5 inches or so that I'm just sewing the last 2 inches and creating that gap that I'm going to use to flip the piece inside out. This is an important part that people usually forget when they make these bags, so don't forget to leave this little gap. Now it's also important to note that I didn't leave the gap at the very bottom of the bag. And though it would seem easier to do that, if you do, what happens when you turn it inside out is the corners get a little funky. So you want to leave that gap at least a couple inches up from the bottom. Okay, so now I have one side stitched with a gap large enough to turn it inside out. And all I'm going to do is stick this back in the machine up against my 5/8 of an inch mark again. And I'm just going to stitch all the way down the other open side. Don't forget to back tag. Okay, I'm back at my mat again. I'm actually not going to cut, but it's just easier to work here. And I've got my one side that's sewn all the way up and down, and then I have another side that's sewn pretty much all the way with a little gap. I'm going to use that gap to actually turn this piece inside out. Okay, and now you've got a pretty nice rectangle, and you can no longer see the seams because you've turned this inside out. So now we're going to take this really simple rectangle, and we're going to make sure that we know where the gap is. I've got mine at the bottom here. Okay, and I'm going to fold this up about a third of the way. And all I want to do is make sure that when I fold this up, I'm leaving enough material to create a nice flap. Okay, so I actually can fold that up a little bit more. So it's about into thirds. Okay, open that back up. And now you need your strap again. I'm going to take my strap and I'm actually going to place it in between the two parts. Okay, so this is not in the gap. It's just folded up onto the strap. Okay, my gap is right here, and I did not sew it shut. I'm actually going to use a single seam on both sides to both attach the strap, close the gap, and create the pocket for the messenger bag. Okay, so here's another spot where you might want to use pins. And in this case, I actually am going to use pins to hold my strap in place. So I've placed those straps in between the folded up parts, and I'm just going to stick a couple of pins in. Now, if you're very accurate or if you're new to sewing, it might be a good idea actually to use more than 2 pins. But since this is a quick, dirty, cheap project, I'm actually just going to use the 2 pins. Okay. Now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew about 1/2 inch from the edge. So it's really 1/2 inch seam allowance, and it's important to do 1/2 inch, less than the 5/8 of an inch that you did before, in order to close that gap that you created to turn this thing inside out. And all I'm going to do is just sew the folded part on both sides. Okay, so I'm back at my machine, and again, you can do this with hand stitching. It doesn't necessarily have to be a machine. I'm going to move my marker up to 1/2 inch. And it's important to do a smaller seam allowance for this step, again, to close that gap. Okay, so once you've got this fed into your machine, you sink your needle. Just going to sew down the sides again about 1/2 inch from the edge. And what you want to do is, as you're going over the strap, make sure to go over it several times to give it some strength. Okay, and again, you can do this by hand and then just sew a couple of extra times over that strap area. Okay. And just pull it out, trim your threads, and do the same thing on the other side of the bag. Now, I did not sew on the flat portion, just on the folded portion. So with 2 simple stitches, you've sewn up the sides, attached the straps, and closed that gap that you used to turn the bag inside out. Now all that's left is to fold the flap down and decorate. You can use any number of things to decorate the front flap. In this case, I've used iron-ons. We're making bags similar to these for South by Southwest for the Etsy Austin team. So if you're in Austin, look out for us. We'll have these bags and they'll be full of promos and goodies. If the strap is a little too long, just knot it up. And don't feel constrained by the 13-inch size. You can play with the width
of the bag and get a different look and feel.
And that's all it takes to make this super simple bag. Be sure to visit our website at www.brokenearproductions.com.